morning. Welcome to our Tibetan Cabinet Secretary building. So this is very unusual for Tibetan schedule-wise or even the Indian schedule-wise. So you can clearly see some camera people who are still adjusting with their camera and making sure. So I think, as I said yesterday, it's really amazing that we could have a weather like this during the monsoon, middle of the monsoon season of Dharamsala. It's like unheard of. So I think not only you brought up. So with that note, I welcome all of you here. And as you can see, we represent the executive branch, and this afternoon we will be meeting with the legislative branch, the parliament. And then we have 3 pillars of democracy and 2 independent commissions. General and personnel department or commission, or the election commission. And our elections are held, every 5 years. It's a direct election. My position is directly elected like the president. And the members of parliament, we have 45 members of parliament, and 10 from 3 regions each, because our parliament reflects and represents Tibet. So for us, 3 provinces of Tibet are very important. Now I don't want to give a lengthy explanation, but Chinese government defines more or less one province as Tibet. Tibet Autonomous Region essentially is Central Tibet and a little bit of Eastern Tibet. But in fact, there are other areas where His Holiness Dalai Lama is from, which is Qinghai Province, where my father was from, late father was from, is Sichuan Province. And Yunnan Province and Gansu Province also has Tibetan prefectures and Tibetan counties. So for us, Tibet means all these areas. So that's why our parliament has 3 provinces, and 3 provinces get 10 seats each. And we have, now Buddhism is, normally we talk of 1, but within Buddhism, in our Buddhism, we have 4 Buddhist sects called Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya, and Geluk. So His Holiness Dalai Lama actually comes from Geluk sect. And more or less shamanistic kind Pön religion, the indigenous religion, we also have. So each of these 4 sects and indigenous religion get 2 seats each. So that Tibet is reflected in the parliament. That's how the elections are conducted. And we have 2 representatives from North America, and 2 representatives from Europe, and 1 from Australia, Japan, and New Zealand. So this we have 45 members of parliament. So this is how it's divided. Elections are held every 5 years. And I will end with saying our democracy that we have is essentially a top-down democracy. His Holiness Dalai Lama said, as he came to exile in 1959, we said we need modern government. We need a democratic government. And he said we must have election. We had just come to exile in 1959, and first election was held at the very beginning of 1960. By September 2 of 1960, we had the first parliament. And then in the next round, those days it was 3 years term. In 1963, His Holiness said, no, we need women representation. So we got women elected in 1963 in the Tibetan refugee parliament, way before Europeans, including Switzerland, had women representation in parliament. So it was essentially his vision, and he implemented right away. So we have 60 years of democracy in exile. So this is something very unique. And if you have studied government exiles or freedom movements, even led by Nelson Mandela or Mahatma Gandhi, they were not democratic in the sense the way we conduct. We have a free election by Tibetans all over the world. So our democracy in exile is a unique experiment. It's a lab test. So we want it to work so that we can take the experience and the culture back to Tibet. So that's our hope. So because we have a democratic partnership here, so as a democratic, administration or a community in exile, we would like to welcome the U.S. congressional delegation who represents democracy in the U.S. Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Your Excellency, and we indeed are very, very excited and gratified to be here, and for precisely the reason that you articulate, not merely our admiration for the Dalai Lama and for the Tibetan story, but also because of the democracy aspects of this story and the way that this government here, based in a foreign land, has nonetheless organized itself to represent the Tibetan people worldwide. So you have welcomed us very warmly. You told us, I guess, maybe not even a year ago.
Yes.
We had a visit, Mr. Buchanan and I,
Last November,
conferred, and thought, well, this would be a wonderful idea to visit you here. And this says, not everything works that quickly in our government. I don't know about yours, but it has materialized, and we're gratified to be here. We will have a lot of questions, I think. But thank you, ministers, also, all of you, for being here, and we're interested in the stories that have brought you here. Vern Buchanan of Florida is co-chair of the commission. Susan Davis of California, a longtime member of the Democracy Partnership. Neil Dunn of Florida, John Rutherford of Florida, Jerry Connolly of Virginia, and Derek Leighton is the executive director of our commission. And we have here our spouses, our staff members, the supporting members of our Marine team who have facilitated this visit. As you can imagine, it has not been a simple thing to, first of all, get the Indian visas. That turned out to be, you probably have heard that story before, but then also to get the weather we needed, and also to get this arranged. So we're grateful to many people who have made this happen. Just a word about the House Democracy Partnership. We are 13 years old. We are building on the work of an earlier commission in the U.S. Congress that in Central and Eastern Europe, as the Soviet Union fell and governments became democratic, they needed to form serious parliamentary institutions, not just showcase parliaments, but real parliaments. And so our institution reached out to them and helped to facilitate their development. And we picked up that work.
Movement, our goal is very simple. Restore freedom for Tibetans in Tibet and preserve our identity is very clear. And what we need is unity, is very important. So our idea is partyless democracy. So that's why it's very unique. I showed you the cabinet room. Normally, cabinet meeting never takes place in the absence of the president or the prime minister. But in our system, even if the cabinet, even if I'm not here, I fully delegate the authority to the ministers, and they convene every Tuesdays and Fridays and make all kinds of decisions on any matter. So sometimes
when I come back, I find out that they have taken some best staff from a department, I said, how did you do that? No, we wanted it, we took it. So there's no veto power, it's a consensus. So if there's a consensus, they can overrule me, Of course, sometimes I will just, push, But this is a matter of trust. This is a matter of labor of love for us. As I told you, their background, as you know, I spent 16 years in the US. I was a Fulbright student. I'm a beneficiary, because of which I got master's degree and doctorate degree. And I worked there for 7 years and came back. Now my salary is, $400+ a month. So which is less than per diem for some people in this room, I know. Now, left my job there, and I'm working for less than a per diem, is because this is a labor of love for us. This is a service. So we all come here because we want to contribute for the cause. We want to strengthen the movement. And hence we always say, if you want to work for money, go somewhere else. If you want to provide service, come here. So this administration is almost zero corruption. So we have taken money out of the equation. So corruption is almost zero because no one comes here for money. I mean, if you work for $400, how much can you corrupt, right? $800, you know. so we have taken corruption out of the equation. So now in normal governments, especially
focus on efficiency. So that's our primary focus. So we have partners at USAID here, through US Congress.
we get a lot of funding. I mean, relatively speaking, we get about $9 million, altogether $11 or $12 million a year. But I think US funding, USAID have come here, they've inspected our paperwork, our projects, and they rate us one of the top in India and South Asia. But each time they say school needs to be built or whatever programs we have, projects we have, within 6 months or 9 months or 12 months deadline is delivered. Because we all are here to provide service. So I also fly economy class, and we all fly economy class. Why? Because we say if I fly business class, I have to spend $4,000 or $5,000 more, which I can save to send 6 more children to university. You know, so they all. In fact, I'm the spoiled one. They all take local transportation bus from Dharamsala to Delhi. Literally, we say now let's save money, so that we can send one more child to school, one more child to college. We can save one more, take care of one more old person. This is a labor of love. So that's what we see. Everything is transparent, honest, least corrupt system. So, so these are the changes we have. I mean, democracy, without political party, essentially comes from this. We all meet together, have consensus. That's how we move forward. Now, moving forward, we have a lot of challenges because when I go to DC or any capital, all of us, our meetings are ad hoc because we are not a formal government. So we have a meeting, somebody shows up, somebody don't. So we have a meeting at 9 o'clock with the Speaker of the Parliament. I had this experience. At 8:30, I got a call. Well, the Chinese embassy visited them and pressured the Speaker not to meet with you, so the meeting is cancelled. Then you wait from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., drinking another coffee. And you can't read Danish or Norwegian newspaper, and you can't watch Danish and Norwegian TV anyways, right? So this kind of challenges you find. And in fact, nowadays, the Chinese embassies, they act with impunity. So I was in South Africa. They organized a protest of 100+ people at the law school where I was speaking. They stormed the campus. They stormed the auditorium and chased away all the students and, the people who were coming to listen. I was at the University of Toronto. There were like 50 Chinese students with Chinese national flag protesting, singing national anthem. I was in Lithuania. Chinese embassy issued a formal press release saying, get out of Lithuania, you don't know anything about Tibet, so on and so forth. This is a blatant, overt action. And I had a lunch with 4 members of Parliament of Canada, and they all received what they call quote-unquote love letters from Chinese embassies saying, why did you have lunch with this guy? So these kind of challenges are, on a daily occurrence, but still, we keep moving, we keep participating, we keep going and raising our small Tibetan flag all over the world. And because of friends like you, because of your visit, you are sending a message to Beijing and around the world. Democracy is universal, and democracy is inevitable. And we have friends around the world if you practice and embrace democracy. So your presence here is a loud and clear message, a very strong message to Beijing. Democracy is what we support. And you accept, at least acknowledge, Tibetan community as democracy. This message will be, will have profound impact and inspiration inside Tibet. 6 million Tibetans who are always on a daily basis, they're illegally listening to radio or browsing, newspaper, trying to get some news saying, we have bipartisan delegation to Dharamsala. They say, oh, our cause is not lost. We should keep our hope alive. We have friends, powerful friends from US Congress. So that's why we are very proud and honored to have you here. So you have sent a really, really strong message for democracy. to Tibet inside Tibet. So challenges are many, but we are Tibetans. We are from the mountains. We have mountain spirit, rugged mountain spirit. Resilience is what we count. So we will nonetheless keep marching forward and face down dictatorship and authoritarianism.
Good. Any other comments from our?
Let me add, talking about Tibetans being tough. I can't imagine, I was looking at some of in Tibet where people live as high as 15,000 feet or 3,000 to 4,000 meters. That's tough in my mind because there's not much air up there. But let me touch on our cooperation. Where do you feel that's at with the U.S.? What more could we be helpful on? I know that the State Department, there's a slot that should be filled, a special coordinator for Tibetan issues. How can we be helpful, for example, on that? But maybe take us through kind of what the relationship is, what we're doing now a little bit more, and what maybe we could do to be even more helpful.
I think immediately is Tibet Policy Act, which was passed in 2002. So it's almost 20 years. So we need to revise it and update the Tibet Policy Act because in the new version, which is being drafted, and by the China Commission, in fact. So Congressman Jim McGovern and Senator Rubio are the two co-chair of the China Commission. So they are working on it, and we fully support it. And if we could get the support of all the honorable Congress members here, which is a bipartisan, and if you could pass that and pass it through the Senate, and a president signs it into a law, then I think that will solidify the role of U.S. government towards Tibetan people. So it addresses all the issues that is about inside Tibet, Tibetan democracy, religious freedom, reincarnation, all the issues, So I think we, earnestly request you that if you could support that bill, will, I think, encapsulate everything that we need to do. Yes.
I think you've got a lot of good friends here, and I'm sure we're all going to take a look at it and find a way to try to work with us.
That will be very kind.
Susan?
Thank you so much for being with us yesterday as well, and we appreciate it, and thank you to all of you as well. I'm impressed that we have so many youth leaders, former. Well, you're still very youthful, so it's okay, but youth leaders, and just thinking about the future. As you know, in your youth, you were impatient, and I'm wondering about the youth today and where you see they're continuing to keep that hope alive, and what role, do you see the United States also in working with the future and your youth?
Yeah, our youth are like youth everywhere. The teenagers love their iPad more than their parents, so to speak. So then the Tibetans are in 40 countries. They're a melting pot of Western countries. So there are a lot of challenges. How can we preserve our identity? So that's one challenge. But what we are addressing it. So that's why the education minister is in New York to have education summit for Tibetans in diaspora, not in India, Nepal, Bhutan, but in diaspora, so that we can have Tibetan as a second language curriculum and the teachers training, things like that. And we have set up weekend schools in Tibetan community all over the U.S. So they need teachers, they need curriculum. So this is what they are trying to discuss and formalize. So in our budget also, in the U.S. Congress budget, the language would be not just for Tibetans in India, Nepal, and Bhutan, but also in diaspora. So because preserving our identity is very, very important. And then actually in a few days' time, we will have what we call 550 Youth Forum. So Tibetan youth leaders from around 14 countries are coming to Dharamsala, 100 of them. So we will have 3 days of workshop on their roles and responsibilities in carrying forward the Tibetan movement. And then we have Tibetan Youth Congress, Students for Tibet. They are doing the political aspect and cultural aspect of the Tibetan movement. And so definitely, youth are, impatient, and they tend to be quite active. And then our worry is, in China, the Chinese government is deliberately discouraging our culture. For example, Tibetan language is not the medium of instruction in universities and high school, even middle school level in Tibet. So that's what they want to assimilate, make Tibet into Chinatown and Tibetan into Chinese. They're doing that. And then Tibetans youth all over the world, because of freedom, they might lose their identity because of too much freedom. So that's the challenge, So we are doing our best, and we are trying to reach out to them. So I think some funding for diaspora could go a long way in helping Tibetan youth all over the world.
Neil?
Mr. President, and all the ministers, let me just say how excited I am. I can say that not just for myself and for my wife who accompanies me, but for all my constituents back home. I'm excited to be here to meet with you. You have a very, very challenging situation. It's not one that you deserve. It's not one that you caused. It was fought upon you by the Chinese. But you've risen to the challenge admirably. I know you studied in America, and you have heard the saying that no great thing has ever been accomplished except by a group of very determined men and women who persevere, who keep working, who are resilient and up to the challenge. All the great things in history were accomplished that way. And I like your chances. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Rutherford.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and meet with the Parliament. To kind of follow up on Susan's comments earlier about the future, one of the things that appears to be could be a challenge to maintaining that culture is this idea that now there's a pathway for Tibetan refugees to become Indian citizens. And I haven't heard, but I would suspect that CTA would be willing, if they became Indian citizens, that at some point, if there was a return to Tibet or they wanted to come back to their Tibetan roots, that they would be allowed to do that. But it seems like for a second generation and on, that could be a challenge to, holding on to this this desire to keep the Tibetan culture alive and one day go back to Tibet. Can you comment on where the Parliament comes down on that issue?
Yeah, our stand is very clear, because as far as Indian citizenship is concerned, it's the constitutional right. Someone who was born in India between 1951 and 87 are automatic citizens of India. This is not for Tibetans, this is for generally Indians. So this is the Constitution of India, which says from 1951 and 87 who was born in India is naturally Indian. So Tibetans came in 1959. So from 59 on till 1987, who was born and brought up in India are naturally Indian citizen. And the only issue is, do you apply for Indian citizenship or passport or not? But in the last 60 years, for all of us are born in India, but the Tibetans who apply for Indian citizenship is not even 5%, it's less than 5%, maybe 2-3%. So somehow preservation of our identity is considered very important. Now also thanks to the government of India, they provide us all the things that Indian citizens get. For example, our schools are subsidized by the government of India, and our land are provided in the settlements by the government of India, so including health. So many things are subsidized by the government of India, and we get to go to Indian universities and Indian schools if you want to. And the jobs also, in some sectors of the government are restricted. Other than that, all the private sector and semi-public sector are also open to Tibetans to work. So hence there is no kind of pressure or compulsion on Tibetans to become Indian citizens to get jobs or to do things in life. You can do business, things like that. So because of that, I think very few percent of Tibetans are applying. But having said that, whether you apply for citizenship of India or America or Europe, our theory, again, our belief is now is being empirically proven, is that passport and citizenship is important, but as far as Tibetans are concerned, it's secondary to the extent we use that citizenship and passport to further our goals. For example, Tibetans in America are getting better education, better exposure. Their standard of livelihood is better. In fact, they can support their family members in India, in fact, in Tibet too, right? Because of that, the younger generation, the American-born Tibetan youth, they're getting better education, better exposure, and hence they will provide better leadership compared to us. So there is a positive side to it, right? Their sense of Tibetanness and Tibetan consciousness, Tibetan sense of patriotism should not dilute. Their sense of Tibetan culture, Tibetan language should not dilute. As long as we work on that, I think they will be very strong. For example, this March 10th was our 60th anniversary. All over the world, the largest turnout of the peace protest, peace march, all over the world happened this year. Now, when we say largest turnout, all of you are members of the Congress, so you have constituency. So when we say largest turnout means, let's say if there's a protest in Switzerland, in Zurich or Geneva, at least 50% of the Tibetans with their children will turn out in the street. That's what we're talking about, 50, 60, 70, 80% will turn out to observe National Uprising Day. So even though our cabinet is in exile, we don't have prison, we don't have police, we don't have military, but the statement we issue on March 10th here is read by every Tibetan in all the events on that day. So they follow us without any compulsion, without any pressure. So, on the one hand, yes, we should look at citizenship of different countries, how it will happen, but there's a positive side too. So as long as you balance it, that's why, when we advise Tibetan youth in North America and also to Tibetan youth, we always say our advice is you must integrate to the American system and you must follow the laws and you must be very grateful to America, to the American government and the American public. You must maintain very good relationship with the American public and you should always be grateful. Having said that, you should integrate but don't assimilate. Now the definition of assimilation is you become so Americanized that you forget everything about Tibet. What we say is be a proud American but also be a proud Tibetan. So that's our advice, So that's why you can maintain both. Because for us, for Tibetan youth, they have extra responsibilities. Not only you're studying for education and career, you are studying for a cause. So that's how we try to do that, yes.
I want to turn to Jerry Connolly, but also remedy and oversight. I didn't introduce Cheryl Williams and Derek Westfall at the table, who are from our embassy in New Delhi and are helping us facilitate this visit, and we really appreciate the support we've had from there. So part of our team, and they have team members with them as well. Jerry Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great privilege to be with you today. I led a congressional staff delegation to Tibet in 1986. And it was very apparent in the visit that the Han Chinese were trying to resettle Tibet with Chinese, to conquer your culture that way. They were also, as you said, suppressing expressions of Tibetan culture. Every monastery we went to, monks, as soon as they realized we were not Russian, wanted to tell us how they had suffered and what had happened. And this was shortly after the Cultural Revolution was over, and we saw the damages of monasteries. So it's not a new thing, what the Chinese are doing. This is a long-term project. And I would be very interested in your assessment of what is the hope of changing Chinese attitude and behavior toward and about Tibet. There's outside pressure like ours, but in the long run, we have to have some change internally in the Chinese government and their mentality.
Yes, that's a very good question. On the pessimistic note, as you rightly pointed out, after the invasion and occupation of Tibet, 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries were destroyed. So 99% of monks and nuns were destroyed. Essentially, their goal was to destroy Tibetan civilization and root out, the Tibetan identity. So that's what they did. Even today, the Freedom House comes with Freedom Index every year. For 3 years in a row, they have listed Syria as the least free, and we all know that. But did you know that Tibet was listed as the second least free region after Syria for 3 years in a row? So in Freedom Index, Tibet comes at the bottom. Now that's the pessimistic side. On the hopeful side, in 60 years, what has happened is that in exile, first of under leadership of His Holiness Dalai Lama, we have rebuilt all the major monasteries brick by brick by brick. All the major monasteries are rebuilt in exile. And if you go to our monasteries, it's filled with monks. Primarily those who fled from Tibet since 1980s and 90s, and they are educated in our monasteries. Now thousands have gone back. Now the hopeful news is, even in Tibet, Buddhism is back in private and social space. The government policy is systematically destroyed and diluted. As we speak, Yashingar, the largest nunnery in Tibet with around 5,000 to 6,000 nuns, is being demolished, and we estimate anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 nuns are expelled. And if you go to YouTube, you'll find some of these nuns who were made to dance on pop songs on stage to humiliate them, to chase them away. And some nuns, 3 nuns, committed suicide too from that area. So as this is being done, but in private and social space, we have revived Buddhism in Tibet. And also Buddhist centers have been established all over the world. And interestingly, in the last 60 years, China has become the largest Buddhist country in the world. 300 million Chinese are Buddhists now, or maybe 400 million. So Mao Zedong thought by destroying all the monasteries in Tibet and disrobing all the monks and nuns, they thought they won. But 60 years later, not only Buddhism has been rebuilt in exile, back in Tibet, and the whole of Himalayan region, Ladakh, Kashmir, Nepal, Buddhism is back in Tibet and in China. So that's the hopeful sign. In that sense, even after that kind of destruction, is being rebuilt. So Tibetans, we had only, when 98% is destroyed, we had only 2% chance of success. We took that and we have rebuilt it. Now Chinese Buddhists are interested in Tibetan Buddhism. So they estimate anywhere from 10 to 20 million tourists who go to Tibet every year. 90% are Chinese from mainland China. They're going there because Tibet is a Buddhist civilization. So there is a joke that, whenever there's a Politburo or Central Committee meeting of the Communist Party, all the husbands are in boardroom meeting discussing politics. Their wives are in Buddhist temple praying for their promotion, at least no demotion, So Buddhism has spread all over China, including in the leadership quarter of Beijing, what we call Zhongnanhai. So there lies the hope that the Chinese Buddhists, when they go to Tibet, some are very loud, there are some are very nasty, and they cause more destruction, but many go back educated. So that's why the Chinese government recently banned them, but some of the top actors like Jet Li and others. I can't name all, but they are not only Buddhists, they follow Tibetan Buddhism. They regard the Yisolam Zalam as the leader, So that kind of thing is taking place inside China too. So that's where our hope lies. Our hope is civilization. So that's why sometimes, people say, China is so powerful, you have no hope at all. We said, no, we have absolutely the best hope, because communism is little more than 100 years old. And Buddhism is 2,600 years old. There's no competition between the two, We survived 2,600 years. And communism is already disappearing, right? Including from North Korea now. Castro is gone, Cuba, China. So, 100 years old and 2,600 years, there was no competition to begin with. So this is our best hope. So that's for us, civilization, our culture, our identity is very important. That's our focus. Even in our schools, from kindergarten to primary school, we teach everything in Tibetan language. Not a word of English. They have to learn science, geography, social studies, everything in Tibetan, so that they're well versed in mother tongue. So after primary school, we teach them in English. So that what we call, our education policy is called bird of two wings. This is very classic Tibetan way of saying, bird of two wings. Meaning, bird, both wing has to be so even that if one is more or less, then the bird cannot fly properly, right? So that's a bird of two wings. So you learn Tibetan and you learn modern education at equal scale, so that you are fully Tibetan, but also a modern educated person. So that's how we preserve our culture.
Let me ask about a couple of related questions with China and also Mongolia. As I think Mr. Buchanan said, we had a very interesting meeting with Richard Gere a few weeks ago, and he was visiting Capitol Hill, and our HDP, as well as the Mongolia caucus, organized his visit. And we of course, got educated on the relationship between Tibetan and Mongolian Buddhism and the historic link there. And it did, and we're trying to. There's a Mongolia Support Act which has to do with some trade matters which we're working on, and I think actually a lot of the same people are working on that as are working on the Tibet legislation. So I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on that relationship and what kind of sustenance you draw from Mongolia's democracy and Mongolia's charting of a self-determination course in the light of two very large neighbors who have often been challenging. And then secondly, the cause of the Uyghurs within China. You began to tell some of us yesterday about how in some ways the policies with respect to Tibet were a warm-up for or a prelude to what you're now seeing with the Uyghurs. That's of course on the more pessimistic side of what you just said to Mr. Connolly, because things aren't getting one bit better with respect to Muslims in China and to the Uyghur minority in particular. So there too, to what extent do you see parallels? To what extent do you see common cause? Be interested in those two relationships.
Tibet, Mongolia, Afghanistan, and Xinjiang was part of this great game in 20th century. So the Russian Tsar, later Soviet Union, and British India and China wanted to control this part of the world. So they saw this, geopolitically speaking, a strategic value in controlling this area. So Mongolia was divided into two, Outer Mongolia, Inner Mongolia. Outer Mongolia became part of Soviet Union, and then Inner Mongolia came under China. And Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, came under China. And Tibet also went under China. And British India essentially managed to keep Nepal and Bhutan and some area. So one reason why the Chinese army invaded Tibet, the excuse was, in 1914, the British, what they call delegation, was led by a young husband expedition. It was a military. They crushed Tibetan, resistance and killed hundreds of them, and went all the way to Lhasa to set up a trade post so that they can have free access to the trade from India all the way to the capital city of Tibet. So this kind of things keep happening. And then Afghanistan, as you can clearly see, Russian tried, at one time, and so it's still in difficult position because no one actually controlled Afghanistan, and you can see the present situation. With Mongolia, we have very close relationship. Interestingly, fourth Dalai Lama was a Mongolian, great-great-grandson of Genghis Khan.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. Because even today, Dalai Lama is the spiritual leader. His Holiness Dalai Lama is the spiritual leader of Mongolia. So if you go to Mongolia, you will see photograph of Dalai Lama all over. He is the spiritual teacher of Mongolia. He is the spiritual teacher, even in Russia, there are 3 republics. Burят, Kalmyk, and Tuva. There are 3 republics in Russia who are Buddhist, and their spiritual leader is His Holiness Dalai Lama. So that's why we have very close relationship between Mongolia and Tibet, and we fully support their democracy.
We've partnered with them for 10 years.
Yes. And so, they, like Tibet, Mongolia is also a landlocked area, like Afghanistan. So they are very much pushed from both sides. For example, people in Mongolia, they want His Holiness Dalai Lama to visit and bless them and give them teachings. And when he actually went and did, what did the Chinese do? They stopped the railway from Mongolia to China, through which they send all their raw materials to the sea for export. Once they stopped it, even in the global market, the value of copper went down by a few percentage because the copper and the raw materials from Mongolia could not be transported out of Mongolia through China to the outside world. And they take such extreme measures, So Mongolia is in a difficult position too, because of the situation. If I'm not mistaken, I think National Security Advisor visited Mongolia. Remember when President Trump was meeting Kim of North Korea recently? The National Security Advisor was in Mongolia, Outer Mongolia.
He was.
Yes.
And Mongolia, it's an interesting story, which we barely know about, but Mongolia for many, many years has been an interlocutor with North Korea for our country.
So as far as Uyghurs are concerned, again, it's part of the same great game, So the party secretary of Xinjiang, Uyghur area, was the party secretary of Tibet for 5 years. So we had labor camp, we have what they call quote-unquote vocational training or concentration camps, we had gulags, all these things were there in Tibet when he was there, and before, preceding him also was there. And he developed algorithm and software to control the whole of Tibetan plateau. And this is how it works. They have a grid system where every Tibetan is issued a ID card with 2nd generation biometric chips, very advanced. But then they also set up checkposts along the way. So in Lhasa, the capital city, every 50 meters there's a checkpost. So whenever someone wants to go buy vegetables, you have to swipe your ID, and the government collects all the data. Right? And then they can track the movement of the people and predict which nomadic area, which village has more farmers or nomads traveling. More they travel, more they come under suspicion, meaning there will be more surveillance camera, there will be more spies, more guns, more police, more prison. That's how they track. This algorithm and software can predict when and where there will be a protest. In fact, 2 years ago during Gandhi Ngamjo, which is like Ramadan or for us Easter, so this algorithm predicted there is likely to be a protest in Chokhang Temple. So lo and behold, thousands of Tibetans actually went to Chokhang Temple as an act of defiance because it's a spiritual event. They want to demonstrate this spiritual faith. And then couple of thousand of Chinese policemen with helmets and machine guns and guns were ready on the other side. How can you have a couple of thousand policemen ready at one, because the algorithm, the software predicted on that day, in that spot, there are likely to be a huge Tibetan gathering, and which might turn into a protest. They're all ready. Now this software is sold to authoritarian regimes around the world. So what happens in Tibet is happening in Uyghur area, but the software is sold in authoritarian. There are reports that Ethiopia and some of the countries are buying this software from the Chinese government, because this is a very effective way to control your people.
Any other questions?
And yes, Uyghurs and we work together.
Yeah.
And,
Well, we're of course appalled by what's going on with the Uyghurs and the kind of turn that the Chinese government has taken toward intensifying this, and that has to be threatening to the Tibetan cause as well. And it's one reason we're here. It's one reason we're here. I think we identify this. We are concerned about it. We think it's important in whatever ways are open to us as American politicians to register our not just our objections, moral and otherwise, but also to show support for the communities that are the victims of this, and so that is one reason that the idea of a visit at this point was so compelling to us. And we appreciate your making it possible and also making clear the connection of the Tibetan cause to human rights worldwide. I would think that's important from your point of view in terms of the people who are willing to help and support, but it's certainly important to us. And as a democracy commission, we don't pretend to have a system that is certainly not perfect, but is not the system for every country. We know that every country will adopt their own variations, but we do believe that the values of human dignity and self-determination that democracy represents are universal, and in the world we live in, that has to be part of our cause, not simply the nuts and bolts, as we say, of parliamentary development, but also this larger cause.
Actually, I wrote my doctorate dissertation on democracy. So the thesis was Democracy in Distress, is exile polity a remedy? Because the theory being that if you want to introduce democracy, let's say in Afghanistan, we are trying, but you should have introduced democracy when they were in exile. They were exiled 3 times in Pakistan and Iran, in those areas. So all the refugee camps, they depend on aid. So when you give them aid, and you don't have to say you have to introduce democracy, but all you need to say is the distributive mechanism should be democratic. So we will come and form a committee elected by the people. These people will distribute your education aid, the health aid, all this welfare aid, right? Then the refugee camps will start electing their own leaders, and that will break down the traditional feudal system. So 3 times they came as refugees, 3 times they went back as with the same traditional feudal system, and then you give billions of dollars and you have constitution and you try to introduce institution, but the process of democracy was never practiced, culture of democracy was never learned. Hence it just breaks down. So when they're in exile, if you introduce them democracy, when they go back, the system will prevail. And this is how you can break down the traditional feudal system, and the distributive mechanism will be transparent and effective. That was my theory. So that now there are 60 million refugees in different regions of the world, including in Kenya, all over. A lot of aid is going, but the distributive mechanism is the same pyramid, feudal system, and actual distribution is happening in the flip pyramid way, in the sense the top elite gets the most and the bottom gets the least. As I'm the chieftain, get it to me, and the consultant, the contract is given to chieftains and the sons and children, things like that, and then aid never goes to the bottom. But had you said, elect your leader and they will distribute, and then the local, grassroots, ordinary people will become leaders, and they will be democratic in distribution and in their mindset, right? So you can see how we all are from, and as I said, we are from refugee camps, you know. My parents had 1 acre of land, 2 cows at most, and 1 dozen chicken. I mean, we were like barely poverty line kind of upbringing. Now we are in leadership position because there's democracy. We got elected. So that was my theory. You know, so I think you can. I mean, the process can be different, but we are very proud to say you'll be meeting our counterpart, the Parliament, this afternoon. Ours is very rigorous. You know, I think after listening to us, you might feel pity, sympathetic to us, because we will have our Parliament session in September. We have 45 members of Parliament. They can ask any number of questions at any given time for 10 days, and we have to answer all the questions. In the last session in March, I answered 263 questions for 2.5 days in a row. So they get up, ask questions, I have to give answer, they get up, ask questions. So I think he broke the record. 300 questions, because he's the Home Minister, Interior Minister.
Good for them. That's what we want.
Yes. And in the budget session, last session was also budget session. I think he must have answered, over 10 days, he must have answered 500 questions. Ours is direct. And in India, you have to form a committee, you invite executive people, there's 2 hours or 3 hours. Ours are 10 days of questions after question. We have to get up and answer impromptu facts, figures. So the smartphone helps, you get data from the start, but very rigorous and also quite polite. So, I mean, this is the most transparent, rigorous system, yeah.
Let me just add real quick.
Yes.
This is just in looking at a lot of this material, talking to you yesterday. It seems like, and I'm an optimist, but it seems like time somewhat is critical in terms of getting a direction, the middle road, the Dalai Lama, all these things converging, the dialogue you'd hope to have with the Chinese, and they kind of push back on that. I mean, how long can you continue to go on in the same position without something, being something happening very material to I'm just looking at it as a business guy, it's just in terms of the future, because it's the power of the hope in the future and expectation. But it seems like you're at a point in time now, or in the next year, couple of years, some things have got to happen one way or the other. Or can you continue as you are just into the future for the next 50 years, worst case scenario? So I guess I'd throw that out.
Now, I think this question, especially coming from a business background, is expected, rational, logical, empirical. And but then if you look at the Jewish people, a couple of thousand years, a few thousand years. If you look at India, 250 years, and so on and so forth. Nelson Mandela was asked the same question. You were in jail, you have 28 years in prison, and 27 years in prison, 8 years in solitary confinement. Forget about restoring democracy in South Africa. I mean, you cannot free yourself. And obituaries after obituaries written about Gandhi. You went to East Timor, right?
Yes.
I met the Ramos Horta. I've met him in Geneva. And I asked him the same question. I said, we've been in this together for so long. I said, how do you do it? He said, no, keep going. One day you will reach your destination. Most important thing is to keep going, no matter what. He gave example. One day he got an invitation from somewhere in the Midwest, and he changed 2 flights. And landed at the airport. One young guy came with his car and said, please, come on in. And he drove him to a cafeteria. Yeah. There were only 5 people in the cafeteria, waiting for Ramos Horta and saying, please tell us about East Timor, right? He changed 2 flights. There were 5. He said, but still went. He talked to 5 people. Next day is 50. Next day is 500. This is how you keep persisting, So, on the one hand, I mean, you must hope something will happen. It's true. Every day is critical. Every week, every month is critical. But you must always go with the thinking that I'm here for the long haul, no matter what. Ultimately, it will happen. Roman Empire collapsed, British Empire collapsed, Soviet Union, Berlin Wall. I mean, you can give list of things that happened in our lifetime, thinking it will not happen, right? East Timor is a case, right? I remember talking to him and said, "Do you think we have one?" He said, "Yeah, but we have to keep trying." And he got Nobel Peace Prize. He's the leader of a free country. But we think our turn is next. Our Nobel laureate, His Holiness Dalai Lama, is next. We are next. We're always thinking next. This is how you keep going. So keep persisting, and you will get there. That's the cycle of life.
I agree.
Yes.
We had a wonderful welcome yesterday. Most of us have never had a welcome anyplace, period.
Jerry's used to it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's outside the hotel, right?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Thanks to all of you. We're
Thank you so much. So we will take a quick few minutes to go to cabinet room because they got to see. We'll take one photo and then come down. We'll drive up.
all right, good.
Thank you.